Hey everybody, welcome back to the Adult Bible Study with First Baptist Church of Rice City. I'm one of our associate pastors, Charles, and we're going to be diving into a new study in the book of Ecclesiastes. I hope that you enjoy today's Bible study. Since we're following along with the Lifeway Explore the Bible material, we're going to be starting in Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 15, and then jumping all the way to Ecclesiastes 2:18 through 26. As we start into Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 15, we must begin by asking the question, who is the author of the book of Ecclesiastes? And he tells us in verse 12, I, that is the author, the teacher, have been a king over Israel in Jerusalem. So then who is this teacher? Solomon appears to be the best answer for this, although it is debated amongst scholars. But here's the reasons why I think that it is Solomon, and I think that is the best answer to who, based on what the author of Ecclesiastes tells us about himself. And here in verse 12, we already get that he is a king over Israel in Jerusalem. In Ecclesiastes 1:1, he tells us that he is a son of David, king in Jerusalem. 1:16 tells us that he has amassed wisdom far beyond everyone else. This is basically what he's saying. Far beyond all those over Jerusalem before me, that's the former kings, my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. Literally, he's wiser than anyone. He's also amassed great wealth, as we see in Ecclesiastes 2:7 and 8, because he's acquired male and female servants. Slaves were born in his house. He's got large herds and flocks. He's amassed silver and gold, the treasure of kings and provinces. He's got singers, concubines. He literally has amassed great amounts of wealth. And those are all descriptors that point us to Solomon. Although Solomon's name is never used explicitly, these descriptors have led both Jews and Christian scholars to identify the author of Ecclesiastes as Solomon. And this is the view that I will be working from during this study. Although regardless of whether Solomon was or was not the author, what we do know is that this book, Ecclesiastes, is in the Bible as the Word of God, and therefore it is God-breathed and is profitable for teaching and reproof, correction, and training in righteousness. And so we dive in to the study. I, the teacher, what has the teacher done? He has applied his mind and examined and explored wisdom and all that is done under heaven. He has thought through. How is Solomon, since that is who I am working with as the author of Ecclesiastes, how has Solomon been uniquely qualified for the task that he has set before himself? Applying his mind and examining everything done under heaven. Well, as king over Israel, Solomon has an abundance of opportunities for observation and for the quest of wisdom. He is also the wisest man to ever live, as 1 Kings 4:29 through 31 tells us. Because God gave Solomon wisdom and great insight, greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He is wiser than anyone, to the point that people in the surrounding nations came to see and hear of Solomon's great wisdom. So his pursuit of wisdom here would have been unmatched by anyone else. And he starts off by saying that God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. What miserable task is Solomon referring to here? Is this teacher referring to? Well, one, we need to understand that when he says miserable, he is talking about a hard job or something that's bad and unpleasant. And so we have in view our labor in life, our work in life is unpleasant, bad, and hard. But why? Because he has seen that all things that are done under the sun, that is literally everything that is done, is futile. a pursuit and chasing after wind. What is all the wisdom of Solomon showed him? Human achievement leaves much to be desired. They are like pursuing the wind and trying to catch it with your hands. It cannot be caught and therefore is futile or meaningless. And then he gives us two proverbs. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Why might Solomon have felt like everything was meaningless? And these proverbs help answer that question. Because even as the wisest person in all the land, as he was, he still could not answer certain things about life. Human effort and action cannot remedy all the irregularities or counteract all the deficiencies of life. And that's what these proverbs bring out. What is crooked cannot be straightened refers to the fact that there are problems that cannot be solved. There is brokenness that cannot be undone. What is lacking cannot be counted means that there is insufficient information. If you do not know, how can you know? There are things that are beyond a human comprehension. That is what Solomon, through these two proverbs, is trying to point us to. That we have a limited perspective. Now let's dive into some of the reasons why Solomon sees our human achievements and efforts to be meaningless and pointless. Ecclesiastes 2:18-21. I hated all my work that I labored at under the sun, because I must leave it to the one who comes after me. That everything he worked at, all his labor, all his accomplishments have become distasteful and scorned. That's what is being portrayed here by that word. I hated it. It's distasteful to me. I just despise it. But why? Because ultimately, everything that he's worked to accomplish in his life, everything that he has accumulated, all will be passed to someone else. And that person may squander it because he may be a fool. That person may ruin it. There is no permanence in the accomplishment and the acclamation of things. We cannot keep all the things that we have done. Those achievements that we have leave us lacking, because he will take over all my work that I labored at skillfully under the sun. That is what's futile, that it will ultimately end. And this caused Solomon to despair everything that he had done under the sun. Why does this continue to cause him despair? And then he realizes that despite his wisdom and his knowledge and his skill, which is what he says here in verse 21, when there is a person whose work was done with wisdom, that would include Solomon, wisdom, knowledge, and skill, which are the things that are needed to do something well, he must ultimately give a portion to a person who has not worked for it. It will be handed down. Death will ultimately cause him to hand it off. And everything that he has labored for will be handed to someone who didn't do anything to receive it. And what he sees that this is a great wrong and futile. The word futile means vanity or profitless. And that term, great wrong, in the Hebrew means an awful injustice, which causes the teacher, Solomon, to again ask the question of verse 22. For what does a person get with all his work and all his efforts that he labors under the sun? And the answer, he's filled with grief, and his occupation is sorrowful. That word grief means pain. He's filled with pain, and his occupation is sorrowful. The word sorrowful there in other translations means a vexation or a grief. Both mentally and physically, he becomes exhausted from all of his effort and all of his labor that he does under the sun. It wears us out. And even in our rest, even at night when we are supposed to be resting, our mind doesn't rest. We're thinking about the work that we have done. We're trying and laboring hard to make it profitable, to make it good, to make it beautiful, to accumulate wealth. And again, he says this too is futile, meaningless, profitless. If all our labor is meaningless, what is the point, and why are we working for it? And the teacher answers that by verse 24. There is nothing better for a person than to eat, drink, and enjoy his work. In view of the lack of permanence of the fruit of one's labor, and the fact that death will nullify his accomplishments, the teacher recommends that we enjoy our work. And why must we enjoy our work? Again, because death will nullify it. Our days under the sun are limited, and it would be a tragedy to waste all of those limited days in grief and sorrow. But he also presses it even further than that, because it's not just to enjoy our work, but it's to see the one that provides it. I have seen that even this is from God's hand. What is the this? This is eating and drinking and enjoying one's work. All of this is brought about from God's hands. Therefore, we must enjoy in light of the fact that God is the one who provides everything, even our enjoyment. Because who can eat and who can enjoy life apart from God? And then he creates two categories. And those categories are those who are pleasing in God's sight and those who are not, as he labels the sinner. For the person who is pleasing in God's sight, for the person who is right before God, who trusts God, who places his faith in God, that person is given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and accumulating, the work and labor of gathering in and trying to create accomplishments to ultimately be given to one who is pleasing in God's sight. Their work becomes meaningless because ultimately it's given away to someone who is pleasing to God. What is the teacher trying to say with these two categories? He is saying that God judges us based on our ethical behavior and our trust in, or the lack of our trust in, the Lord. As we saw in our study in the book of Job, this is not always a clear-cut picture, although the teacher of Ecclesiastes probably saw this based on the Exodus from Egypt and other stories that he knew from growing up and having seen in his own life of how people gathered and then gave to the people of Israel. How Israel came in and conquered nations and forced them out of the land and had a land that was not originally theirs, and had cities and vineyards that they did not plant because they had conquered and moved out. Although this is not always true in life, the Christian view of eternity gives us a freedom to understand that God will and does judge everyone justly, blessing those who trust him and cursing those who do not. This might not have been exactly how the author of Ecclesiastes was portraying it, but based on the furthering of Revelation, we know this to be ultimately how this is played out. But even further than that, we must realize that the gospel of Jesus gives us the ultimate answer for our toil and labor in life. Because it is through Jesus that we are made right. And it is through Jesus, our labor, that is, as 1 Corinthians 15:58 would put it, that we might be steadfast. My dear brothers and sisters, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the Lord's work, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. We are in life to do everything to the glory of God. That is our job. We are to give God glory. We are to praise him. We are to use our work and the working of our hand to point to him, to push back against the darkness and to show forth the light of Jesus Christ in everything that we do, that we might excel in the Lord's work in proclaiming who he is by everything that we do. And it is in this steadfast commitment to him and this immovable persistence in glorifying God in all that we do that will cause our labors to not be in vain, because our labors will then be in the Lord, to glorify the Lord, to praise His worthy name. My challenge for us as we wrestle with this Bible study, and as we wrestle with Ecclesiastes, and we look at how futile our work is, because it will be handed down ultimately, because death and sin reign in this world. But that is not the ultimate end, because Jesus Christ has come, and He will come again to make right all that is wrong, so that our labors and everything that we do will not be in vain, but will be to the praise and glory of His worthy name.